In this video, we're going to take a look at two of the most common swing faults that kind of go hand in hand, and they're known as the sway and the slide. And what we're talking about when we're talking about swaying and sliding is excessive lateral motion. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, excessive lateral motion simply means that during the swing, you're either moving too far off of the ball or too far through the ball, depending on if it's a sway or a slide. Sway being excessive lateral motion off of the ball on the backswing, or slide is an excessive lateral motion through impact on the downswing. Now, they might be very similar in nature, but there's one key difference that we're going to distinguish as we get going. Because both of these have to do with hip rotation, and then we'll call this pelvic control. And what I mean by pelvic control is hip, leg, core, glute strength, the ability to stabilize the lower part of the body. So we need mobility through the hips, but we also need stability through all the muscles that surround the hips. And this is true in both the sway and the slide. Now, the one key difference here is as we get into the conversation of pelvic control, what we're talking about is backswing versus downswing, sway versus slide. And to use some technical terms, when we're talking about sway, the strength that we want to build is known as eccentric strength. Not something you need to know the term of, but it's important to understand the concept. And on the downswing, when we're talking about slide, we're talking about concentric strength. So real quick before we move into the rest, let's just define what these two mean, just so you have a better understanding of how to go through the protocol. Because the exercises don't change, but how you do them will. Eccentric is a fancy way of saying that your muscles are contracting and squeezing as they're being lengthened. And concentric means that your muscles are contracting and activating while being shortened. And this is an important distinction because in the backswing, during a sway, your body will be stretching out as all your muscles fire. So we want to train them eccentrically. We want to train them to contract while they're being stretched out. And on the downswing, as we talk about the slide, we're talking about concentric. After they've already been stretched out, we want to improve their ability to contract and fire because that helps create power and speed. Again, the exercises we're going to prescribe aren't going to change from one to the other, but how you train them does. And one way of thinking about it, another term for eccentric is known as a negative. Okay, and a negative is for example, let's say you were hanging from a bar and you do a pull-up. Okay, that pull-up, pulling yourself up, that's concentric. You pulled yourself up. But the eccentric is lowering yourself, letting yourself come back down, because now your muscles are stretching out as they're contracting. So when we get into some of our exercises later, we want to look at it as, are we focusing on the lowering or the raising portion? Okay, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but that's just a side note for the difference between sway and slide. But again, the foundation principles are the same. So let's get into hip rotation. Now, like most of our protocols, if we're improving the mobility of a joint, the first thing we need to do is activate the muscles around that joint. So we're talking about, of course, our favorite, glute activation. One of the most important things that we can do on a regular basis is make sure that our glutes are firing. Once they are firing, we need to improve the rotation of the hip. And we're going to do that by starting off with something known as a Captain Morgan stretch. And I named it the Captain Morgan stretch because when you do it, it kind of looks like you're Captain Morgan with this picture of his leg up on a barrel on the bottle of rum. It's very similar to that. And then we need some deep change. And that deep change is going to come with a frog stretch. super amazing way to get the hips to open and to rotate. So that's the hip rotation side, but again, we still have the pelvic control side. And again, whether it's sway or slide, these exercises stay the same. It's how we train them that changes. And the first one we're going to do are lunges. And I like lunges because it creates strength and control in the pelvis while getting us into a split stance, which is a little bit stable. It's a really good way to build this strength is by doing lunges, focusing on movement, making sure that your torso stays upright. They can be stationary lunges, they can be stepping lunges, they can be reverse lunges, they can be weighted lunges. The difference being, again, if we're working eccentrically for our sway, and I'll just put this up here, sway is eccentric and slide is concentric. So for example, with the lunges, if we're working on our sway, it's really focusing on the way down. Nice and slow down, and then back up. Slow down, really good form down, and back up. Whereas a concentric version would be down, then up, down, then up. Okay, having a little bit more explosiveness on the up part as opposed to really controlled on the way down. Next up after our lunges is a single leg toe touch. One of the best exercises we can do for pelvic control and glute activation and all the things that we're trying to work on. Now again, the eccentric would be to balance on one leg and very slowly, as slow as you can, reach down to either the knee or the shin or your toe or wherever you can get to, and then come right back up. If we're doing concentrically, the down doesn't matter so much, but then up, we want to have nice and powerfully with that being most of the focus. And then lastly, we have a third exercise here, which are skater jumps. Now the cool thing about a skater jump is it already has the eccentric, concentric elements built into it. You're not going to be able to explode farther in your skater jump until you can really nail the landing of the skater jump, which is brilliant because the landing is eccentric. We've got to be able to stick the landing before we can work on exploding out, okay? Because our ability to explode concentrically is dependent on how strong we are eccentrically. And if we want to go one step farther, how strong we are eccentrically depends on how much what we call isometric strength we have, which is when your muscles contract and squeeze without changing shape. And this is one of the essences behind power stretching. It's why we do things like glute activation before hip rotation. We need to get the muscles of our body to squeeze and activate without changing shape first. So this is what we would call an isometric. And that isometric helps improve range of motion and mobility so that we can add different strength components like we see here in our sway and slide protocol. One of the most important things any golfer can learn how to do is learn how to activate your glutes. These are super powerful muscles and they're responsible for generating big swings and for protecting your lower back. But we need to get them turned on. So we're going to lay down on the floor on our back and you're going to put your hands under your butt cheeks. You can go palms up, palms down, either is fine. And we're just going to spend some time getting our butt to squeeze and our hands underneath there so that we can feel that sensation and get some feedback. If you want to close your eyes, that can help. But what we're going to do is squeeze both your butt cheeks as hard as you can. 3, 2, 1, and then turn them off. And then squeeze just your right cheek as hard as you can. 3, 2, 1, and turn it off. Then your left cheek. 3, 2, 1, turn it off. Now we're going to turn them both back on. And we're going to see if we can turn just the right one off. Either you can or you can't. Turn it back on and try to turn your left one off and then back on. And this will be one cycle and you can go through this as many times as you need to until your butt is contracting nice and strong. One of my favorite exercises to improve your hip mobility is called the Captain Morgan stretch because I thought it kind of looked like the picture of Captain Morgan on those bottles of rum. And it's super simple. You can do it in a lot of places. You can do it on the edge of your golf cart. You can do it with a little step stool. It's really simple. What we're going to do is start by standing square facing whatever it is we're using. Put your foot on up. Now we're going to take your hand. This is my left leg. I'm going to use my left hand, put it on the inside of my leg. I'm going to open up my hip. Okay, so I started square, brace this leg, and now I'm trying to open the hip. Now it's not about twisting your upper body. Upper body doesn't do anything in this stretch. It's about opening the hip. Okay, so open up the hip as far as it can go. For some of you it might not be much, that's okay. But go as far as it can, and once you get there, you're going to push this whole leg into your arm. But your arm is going to brace against it, okay? Our goal is to feel a stretch through the hip, like you're trying to pop your hip bone out. Like if you've ever cooked and made a chicken, you pop the chicken wing, kind of what we're doing here. Brace that leg, open it, push the leg into the hand, push the hip away. They're all going to fight each other. Breathe and relax. And for bonus points, after you've improved a little bit here, you can start to add what's called a pelvic tilt while doing the Captain Morgan stretch, just to get a little bit extra. So it's the same idea. I'll show it from this angle, open it up, but we get a pelvic tilt, an arching and a rounding of the back, a rocking of the pelvis while doing the Captain Morgan stretch. Really awesome way, really simple way to get the hips open. This next stretch looks weird, but I promise you it's one of my absolute favorites for getting your hips open, and it's called a frog stretch. And what we're going to do is we're going to get onto our hands and knees and start by getting your knees as wide as they can go. Now don't force it. Now you might find that if you walk your hands forward a little bit, you can get a little bit wider, and that's okay. At this point, it doesn't matter about where your feet are, whether they're out or in, just go wherever is comfortable. Then we're going to push ourselves forward and backward, opening up the hip and squeezing the butt when you find some tight spots. Ultimately, we're going to start to work in what I call a W pattern, where our chest goes up to the right, down, out to the left, okay? And then our feet start to go with it, okay? And we're just turning against our hips. Now, what I'm doing right now, what I'm demonstrating is a very advanced version of the frog stretch. My big warning is don't go too far too quick. Take your time. This is one where patience will reward you. Don't just rush through it. There's a lot of really cool stuff that can happen if you spend the time. So start where I showed you at the beginning and only progress farther if your body will allow you. The biggest key here is doing it consistently over time. It's better to do it for 2 minutes 3 to 4 times a week than for 10 minutes once a month, okay? So just show up and keep sticking with it, and I promise you, you will be hard-pressed to find a better hip opening stretch. I feel like so many players kind of skip the foundation when they start talking about strength and power and speed training. And they go right into these advanced exercises without having first mastered the fundamentals. And one of those fundamental movements is the lunge, and it's a really important exercise that we should all know. And there's a lot of variations of the lunge, but there's a couple principles that hold true regardless of which variation you're working with. And one of the big ones is that we do not want your knee to go out past your toes. That creates a lot of instability in the leg, puts a lot of stress on your knee. You want to make sure that your knee stays behind the toes, maybe even in line with the heel, because that gives you more pushing and stability power using your legs and your butt. Okay, so whenever you do a lunge, you want to make sure, okay, this knee stays behind. If it starts tracking out, no bueno. Other than that, we want to make sure that the chest stays tall, that we get a nice 90-90 bend of the legs, 90 degrees at the knee, 90 degrees at that knee, chest stays tall, feet are flat, toes are engaged into the ground, my foot's not flared out to the side, okay? It's not anything like that. We're staying pretty square. We can do jumping lunges, we can do balanced lunges, we can do reversed lunges, we can do elevated lunges. The list goes on and on. But the keys to doing it successfully are making sure that your setup and your form is good. So don't let those knees go out past your toes. Keep your chest up, 90-90 at the legs, and stay engaged with those feet. One of the absolute best ways to build strength and control of the lower body as well as coordination and balance is the single leg toe touch. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get our foot flat on the ground and bring your other leg up flat to the ground. Now we're going to bend at the waist as low as we can. Now for some of you, this might be enough. Just trying to do this motion might be plenty. But then we work our way down. Can we get to our knee and come all the way back up? Can we get to our shin and come all the way back up? Can you get down to the toes or to the floor and again come back up under control? Spend as much time as you need to working on getting a little bit farther each time before switching sides to balance it out. There are few exercises better than the skater jump when it comes to rotary power, coordination, sequence, you name it. What a skater jump is at its essence is a lateral side-to-side jump on one leg, but that leg switches. So I start on my right leg and I'm going to jump to my left leg with the goal of sticking that landing. Okay? If I jump too far and I shuffle or fall, it's a sign that I've jumped too far. I'm not ready for that. And so it's okay to start with small jumps where it's perfect and you really nail that landing and then work into greater distances over time. But again, you want to stick the landing and you want to be able to hold that position under control for at least 3 seconds to make it count. If you found any of this information helpful, please go to tourshotgolf.com to check out and learn more. And then check me out on the social medias at Facebook. Come into my free Facebook group, the Mobilitas Movers, or check me out on Instagram or YouTube, both at TourShotGolf. Move better, play better.